Hey everyone, I'm Mary, and let's be real, you're probably playing or just finished Resident Evil Requiem, and you're still trying to catch your breath, right? Capcom truly delivered an incredible experience by blending the tension of exploring the dark corridors of the Wrenwood Hotel with newcomer Grace Ashcroft and the pure adrenaline of action alongside the legendary Leon Kennedy. Today, I've picked out 10 new games with that same Requiem vibe. So grab your favorite drink, fix your posture, and let's get straight to the games.
Next step, improvise.
If you came out of Resident Evil Requiem with a hunger for more heavy horror, I bet ILL has everything it needs to become your next obsession. It's a first-person horror that bets on body, impact, and physical discomfort, not just jump scares and tension. The dev's goal is clear, to make you feel as if the horror is happening to you on an almost tactile level, with enemies that don't just drop dead, but suffer, adapt, and even mutate based on what you do. The setting shown revolves around a laboratory taken over by a mysterious entity with an isolated and hopeless atmosphere. And the story leans into the protagonist's personal motivations, a real "I must go on even if everything tells me to quit" style. What gets me here is how the game tries to balance two feelings I love in survival horror. Those moments where you're in total panic, and those where you're screaming with excitement because the combat got intense and dirty in just the right way. Now, the heart of ILL seems to be the mix of survival horror and action, exploring, managing resources, inventory management, finding and upgrading weapons, crafting and modding them, because nothing is infinite and the game wants to make you pay for your decisions. They mention heavy encounters from duels to groups, waves, and bosses, as well as puzzles and environment interactions that change the map itself, like fixing the electricity to make one area better while another becomes a darker nightmare. And in the arsenal, expect the basics done well. Shotguns, AK-47s, among others, mixed with more creative weapons and plenty of melee, which to me is a great sign for variety and short-range desperation. Speaking personally, the reason I think anyone who loved Requiem needs to put ILL on their radar is that it seems to understand an essential part of modern horror, which is turning violence and deformity into a mechanic, not just decoration. The game sells the idea of a reactive world and unpredictable enemies with hyper-realistic body horror that wants to make you uncomfortable by how the creatures move, react, and break in different ways, giving it a very practical flavor, inspired by classic horror with physical effects and animatronics. The Sinking City 2 takes place in Arkham during the 1920s. In a supernatural version of the United States, or the city has turned into a nightmare. Supernatural floods, sinking streets, cracking buildings, and monsters that look like they crawled out of a collective nightmare. Now, what I found most interesting in the demos is that the focus has shifted. The first game was much more detective horror, with a heavy focus on investigation and puzzles, but the Sinking City 2 is clearly in traditional survival horror mode, featuring heavy combat, semi-open exploration, and a palpable sense of scarcity. The protagonist needs to fight with typical 1920s firearms, use melee weapons, manage resources and inventory, and live with a map that changes as the water rises, making areas accessible one moment and blocked the next, which requires a lot of route planning. Another point that makes the game a great fit for Requiem fans is the atmosphere of paranoia and degeneration. Arkham is a place where the environment itself is sick, with ruins, abandoned hospitals, decaying mansions, and creatures that mix flesh, water, and something beyond human comprehension. The game uses Unreal Engine 5 to shove a heavy atmosphere in the player's face, with beautifully crafted lighting and water volume, plus creatures that move in very disturbing ways, reinforcing that feeling of nothing here is normal and nothing is truly safe. What excites me most is that investigation still exists, but as an optional system, offering benefits to those who want to dive into the lore and discover secrets instead of being mandatory to progress. This means you can choose to be a more paranoid detective, collecting clues and solving puzzles, or focus on blasting through the city with lead, scarce ammo, and a constant sense of danger. The game is confirmed for PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series, with a release scheduled for the first half of 2026. Meaning, if you loved Requiem, it's a good time to start marking this title on your shopping list. Heavy Metal Death Can is a retro survival horror inspired by the classic era of the genre, but with an identity that won me over instantly. It all takes place inside a Swedish military submarine in an alternate timeline of the late 70s. That means no cozy mansions or open cities. Here, it's narrow corridors, creaking metal, and that feeling of being trapped miles away from any help. The horror hook is simple and effective. The submarine has been infested by an entity called Sludge, which possessed the crew and turned your colleagues into zombies, and you need to figure out what happened while looking for survivors. I really like the flavor of this because the game doesn't try to be just gore for gore's sake. It tries to build the kind of dread that comes from context. Absolute isolation, a cold industrial environment, and the idea that your very workplace has become a death trap. In terms of gameplay, it shamelessly embraces old-school Resident Evil. Fixed camera angles, tank controls, with a modern option too, and clear risk-reward decisions, like when it's worth spending ammo, when it's better to run, and when you should take a long detour just to avoid a bad encounter. The promotional material itself talks about balancing ammo, health, and risk. And that's the same cruel math that makes survival horror truly work. Because fear doesn't just come from the monster, it comes from the price of every mistake. I think the best thing about Heavy Metal Death Can is the setting, because a submarine gives you a type of claustrophobia that few games can sustain for hours without getting repetitive. It's set to release in 2026, and you can already wish-list it on Steam, so it's the kind of game I'd keep an eye on right now. If you left Resident Evil Requiem with an insatiable hunger for more horror that respects your intelligence and makes you truly uncomfortable, mark your calendar. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake arrives on March 12th, 2026, and it has everything to be the next obsession in your lineup. This is a full remake of the 2003 classic, but don't think it's just a graphics polish, because here, Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja rebuilt everything from scratch, keeping the soul of the original while adding a layer of modern production that makes Minakami Village, that cursed hamlet, feel palpably alive in its terror. The heart of the experience is the story of twin sisters Mio and Mayu Amakura, who get lost in an abandoned village where vengeful spirits roam the shadows, and their only defense is the camera obscura, a special camera that captures and seals ghosts. Unlike Requiem, where you run and gun, the combat here is ritualistic. You have to face the horror head-on, frame the soul through the lens, and wait for the exact moment to click while the ghost lunges at you. It's a completely different tension, more intimate and psychological, that turns every encounter into an exercise in panic control. What got me particularly excited is how they expanded the gameplay without betraying its essence. The camera obscura now has focus, zoom, and filters that change the perspective and offer different functions for both exploration and combat, adding new depth for those who want to optimize every shot. And there's a new mechanic called Holding Hands with Mayu, where you can hold your sister's hand to restore health and spiritual power, reinforcing that bond between the two as both a narrative and mechanical element. It's the kind of touch that elevates horror from survival to emotion. Launching for PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch 2, Xbox Series, and PC, this remake promises revamped graphics with dramatic light and shadow contrasts, 3D audio that makes you feel spirits approaching, and even new areas and subplots that expand on what fans already knew. For me, it's the perfect choice for anyone wanting to change the pace after Requiem, because instead of constant action, you get an oppressive atmosphere, a slow burn terror, and a story between sisters that, let's face it, has the potential to destroy you emotionally, just like Requiem's best moments did. John Carpenter's Toxic Commando is an insane co-op survival FPS that mixes zombies, mutant monsters, practical effects explosions, and a very 80s cult vibe, signed by none other than John Carpenter himself. The game is an action horror shooter focusing on hordes, mass destruction, and chaotic combat. So it's not a slow burn tension game. It's more like an action horror movie you can play with friends. And that's exactly what captivates me. The story casts you as one of the Toxic Commandos, a bunch of unlikely mercenaries hired after an experiment to manipulate the Earth's core goes horribly wrong and releases an entity called the Sludge God, which turns the environment into a viscous mess and humans into horrifying creatures. You and your team have to traverse apocalyptic scenarios, destroying hordes, taking down nodes, and completing contracts while surviving monsters, explosions, and a ton of humor straight out of an 80s B-movie. It's the kind of game that doesn't take itself too seriously, but still delivers palpable horror, with grotesque creatures, blood, neon lights, and visual effects that look fresh off a horror movie set. In practice, the gameplay is focused on 4-player co-op, with classes, perks, special abilities, and an arsenal ranging from traditional weapons to more cinematic items like katanas and heavy explosives. The demo already shows a very fluid combat system, focusing on movement, cover, vehicle use, and team coordination to survive massive waves of enemies, similar to what fans of World War Z or Left 4 Dead already know, just with more visual weight and a strong art direction. The fact that there's already a free demo on Steam and it's being released on PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series also helps, as you can jump right in and see if the rhythm matches what you enjoy after Requiem. What excites me most about John Carpenter's Toxic Commando is precisely this mix of over-the-top humor, explicit horror, and frenetic action. It doesn't try to be silent horror. It assumes you want to go in shooting, laughing, swearing, and watching the chaos explode on screen. If you like it when horror comes with a synth soundtrack, a period piece tone, and an 80s video store feel, this is a title you can use to provide a fun counterpoint to the heavier journey of Requiem.
That's half of our problem solved. Now we can focus on finding a decryption box.
Looking for a box. Exciting.
The last known location of a decryptor was in the vicinity of Gilby Lake.
Let's see if the fish are biting.
Cthulhu, the Cosmic Abyss is a first-person psychological thriller focused on investigation and cosmic horror, developed by Big Bad Wolf, the same studio as The Council, and focused on building a horror where you can't shoot your way out of problems. The premise won me over immediately. The year is 2053. Earth has depleted its resources, and megacorporations have gone to drill at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. But they ended up knocking on the door of Riel, the mythical submerged city where Cthulhu is imprisoned. What makes this game the perfect recommendation for those coming off Requiem, looking for a change of pace, is its approach to gameplay. Forget shotguns and inventories full of ammo. The cosmic abyss has no combat. The tension comes from exploring an underwater mining station and eventually the non-Euclidean ruins of Riel while solving Resident Evil-style puzzles and gathering clues in a deduction system reminiscent of Sherlock Holmes games. You play as Noah, an occult investigator who relies on an AI called Key to scan objects, reveal chemical clues, and organize everything mentally to reach different conclusions about what's happening. The part I find most brilliant about this project is how Lovecraftian horror is implemented practically. The game environment was built in Unreal Engine 5, meaning the visuals of the ocean depths and impossible architectures are absurdly beautiful and oppressive. But the true enemy here is your own mind. The game features a sanity system and a branching narrative where your choices, the way you solve mysteries and how much you expose yourself to Cthulhu's influence, change the course of the story and the protagonist's fate. It's the kind of game that promises different paths and multiple endings, which adds a massive replay factor.
I just got back from Camp Boot. We had to run after Selena summoned that thing. I don't think he made it. We tried to stop her, I swear. That's why I broke the artifact. It caught up to us and then...
Directive 8020 arrives on May 12th, 2026, and it's exactly the kind of game that will make you distrust everyone on screen, including your own friends in co-op mode. It's the new bet from Supermassive Games, the studio behind Until Dawn and The Quarry, but this time they've ditched the forests and mansions to throw us into outer space on a colonial ship called the Cassiopeia, where survival depends on figuring out who is still human before it's too late. The premise is that Earth is dying, humanity is out of time, and the last hope is the planet Tau Ceti F, 12 light years away. But when the Cassiopeia arrives and suffers a crash landing, the crew discovers they aren't alone. There's an alien organism on board that mimics its prey perfectly. Yes, that The Thing-style psychological terror where you look at your partner and don't know if they are still themselves. This constant paranoia of never knowing who is friend or foe is the perfect fuel for those who enjoy survival horror that toys with your sanity. In terms of gameplay, Directive 8020 maintains the Dark Pictures DNA. With multiple protagonists, you control 5 crew members and choices that truly matter, potentially resulting in permanent character deaths or changing the fate of all humanity. But there's an interesting new feature called Turning Points, which allows you to walk back certain decisions to see how safety isn't always obvious. Additionally, the game introduces heavy stealth mechanics, where you need to avoid enemies popping up from unexpected places, using tools like scanners, flashlights, and even a wedge tool that serves as an improvised weapon. Best of all, it will have local co-op for up to 5 players from launch, alongside traditional single-player, meaning you can experience this paranoia with your friends on the couch. The game isn't just about shooting monsters. It's about managing distrust, making impossible decisions, and trying to keep the crew alive while something impersonal and horrible lurks in the ship's dark corridors. It releases for PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC via Steam, representing Supermassive's chance to return to the quality roots that made Until Dawn a classic, now in a space setting that promises to be even more oppressive. If you like horror that tests not just your skills, but also your nerves and your ability to trust those around you, this is one of the most promising titles of the year.
Everything.
We're all gonna die out here.
If you finished Resident Evil Requiem with that hunger for psychological horror that makes you question every shadow and every distant sound, Silent Hill Townfall promises to be the next one to keep you glued to your chair. Recently revealed at a State of Play, this new chapter in the series arrives in 2026 for PS5 and PC, developed by Screenburn Interactive and co-published by Konami and Annapurna Interactive. What grabbed me right away was the return to classic themes of mystery, tragedy, and loss, but on an isolated island called St. Amelia, covered in a dense fog that turns the place into a living labyrinth of nightmares. You play as Simon Ordell, a guy who returns to this island to set things right, only to find an abandoned town filled with restless presences. You carry only an IV bag, a medical bracelet, and a portable analog TV that picks up unstable signals to warn you of nearby enemies. A genius evolution of the series' classic radio that got me excited because it adds layers to the tension without overcomplicating things. The game is entirely in first person, mixing tense exploration, stealth to avoid confrontations, and frantic combat with blunt weapons like boards and pipes, giving you that sense of pure desperation where you have to decide whether to run, hide, or fight back, knowing nothing is guaranteed. The setting in cold, isolated Scotland, or at least with strong Nordic vibes, promises narrative puzzles that gradually reveal fragments of Simon's past and his connection to the place, all running on Unreal Engine 5 to deliver an oppressive atmosphere with lights and shadows that stick in your memory. To me, this is what Silent Hill does best. It's not just jump scares, it's mental discomfort, the kind that makes you pause the game to breathe and think about what you just saw materializing in the fog. Personally, after Requiem, I see Townfall as the perfect counterpoint to more physical survival horror, because here, the horror is internal and environmental, forcing you to face the unknown without easy shortcuts. With a new studio bringing fresh air to the franchise and rumors of a March release, though nothing official, you can already wishlist it on Steam or Epic. If you like it when terror invades you slowly and breaks you emotionally, this is a must-watch for your 2026 radar. Retrieval is an indie promising to become a benchmark, developed by just 2 people at 333 Studios, one of whom is Spanish, with direct support from PlayStation Spain and Nvidia. The story revolves around Hannah Loesch, commander of a research team on the distant planet Rallian, who ends up stranded in a mysterious base styled like a retro-futuristic subway full of chilling secrets and horrors that will make you rethink every step. The pure in-engine trailer in Unreal Engine 5 already shows insane visuals thanks to Nvidia's Rester tech, making everything look like it's out of a sci-fi horror blockbuster. What captivated me instantly is how the game embraces Dead Space and Callisto Protocol vibes, but with an immersive narrative focus and complex characters, where you explore a destroyed underground train station, dealing with injuries, crashes, and threats that appear out of nowhere. It's not just run and gun. It has that classic survival tension, with enemies around every corner, forcing you to manage resources and make decisions that weigh on the plot. The post-apocalyptic setting, with shattered worlds and doubtful allies, gives off an air of isolation reminiscent of the best space horror. In gameplay, expect a captivating mix of combat against terrifying adversaries, environmental puzzles, and a narrative that pulls you in without filler. It's straight to the fear, with mechanics promising depth despite the small team. It carries influences from Resident Evil and The Last of Us in the way it builds tension and character development, which to me is gold for those wanting something fresh yet familiar. Retrieval excites me because it's one of those indies that could surprise everyone, like Layers of Fear or the first Dead Space did, especially with industry veterans like ex-Naughty Dog staff on the team. It's slated for a 2026 release on PC, wishlistable on Steam, PS5, and Xbox Series S. After Requiem, it's perfect for those wanting cinematic horror with jaw-dropping graphics and a story that sticks. I'm keeping an eye on it and hoping it delivers because it clearly has sleeper hit potential.
The lack of understanding to push what we don't know when something should be left alone.
There's nothing we can do. There is no end.
The Occultist is a first-person narrative horror where you play as Alan Rebels, a paranormal investigator who travels to the abandoned island of Godstone to uncover the truth about his father's disappearance. The island is shrouded in fog, decaying, and carries the weight of a macabre cult that performed disturbing experiments and cruel rituals there in the past. What totally changes the feel compared to Requiem is that here, you aren't the arsenal guy, you're the nerves guy. The game focuses on exploration, stealth, and puzzles, and the idea is to avoid direct confrontation whenever possible. This don't play the hero approach makes the fear much more intimate, as every noise becomes a threat, and every corridor becomes a bad decision waiting to happen. I like this because it's a horror that forces you to slow down and observe the environment instead of solving everything with bullets. The star of the gameplay is Alan's mystical pendulum, which serves as your primary tool for investigation and survival. It allows you to interact with and even modify the environment with 5 different mechanics, giving it that, okay, I have an instrument, but I need to learn to use it right spice that fits mystery games so well. The goal is to experience the island through Alan's eyes, reading the place, understanding signs, and facing the supernatural as something that lives in the walls, the ruins, and the things the game lets you notice gradually. What draws me most to The Occultist is the type of atmosphere it promises, a more intimate and personal narrative with that feeling of ancient curses and buried guilt, and a horror that doesn't rely just on jump scares, but on oppression and doubt.
What are you trying to show me?
Stinks of sulfur. Weird coldness. This cornfield hasn't been cared for in decades.